The call came in just after midnight. A woman's voice, shaking, gasping, barely able to form the words. Panic thick in her breath. Desperation clawing at her throat. "Help me, please, help me," the dispatcher tried to calm her, to get details. But the words tumbled out in broken fragments. "He hurt me. He was supposed to protect me. Then silence. A breath. And a single, shattered whisper. It was him. Red and blue lights tore through the darkness. A convoy of squad cars, sirens wailing, slicing through the quiet streets of one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in the country. In the driveway of a sprawling estate, officers moved with precision. Guns drawn. Commands sharp, unwavering. They found him in the servants' quarters. His hands stained with sweat. His face twisted in shock. A man who had spent years in service to the family he thought he could trust. And yet, in that moment, trust meant nothing. Because before he could speak, before he could protest, he was already on the ground, wrists bound, the cold weight of steel locking around his skin. The accusation was damning. A woman, barefoot, trembling, wrapped in a silk robe torn at the seams, pointed at him from the shadows of the grand foyer. Tears streaked her face, her chest rising and falling with uneven breaths. "It was him," she repeated, voice cracking, raw with something between fear and fury. He attacked me." In an instant, the verdict was sealed. No trial. No questions. Just the swift, unrelenting force of justice. He was dragged through the hallway, past the walls he had walked 1,000 times, past the home he had devoted years of his life to serving. He tried to speak, to say it wasn't true, but the words fell away, swallowed by the deafening chaos around him. The world outside was already waiting. Reporters. Cameras flashing. Headlines being written before the ink was even dry on the police report. Billionaire's wife assaulted by family driver. Victim left broken after brutal attack. Trust betrayed in the most unthinkable way. The courtroom was just a formality. The evidence, they said, was indisputable. A broken woman. A story so vivid, so horrifying, that no one questioned it. Bruises mapped across her skin like a crime scene. Shattered glass from the struggle. His fingerprints, on her wrist, on her dress. The jury didn't deliberate long. They didn't need to. The gavel struck. The sentence handed down. 15 years. As he was led away, the weight of the chains around his wrists nothing compared to the weight of what had just been taken from him, he turned to the one man who could have saved him. The husband. The billionaire. The man who had called him a trusted employee, even a friend. He stood silent. Expression unreadable. Eyes dark. And then, he turned away. For 4 years, the world believed a lie. For 4 years, an innocent man sat in a prison cell, condemned by a crime that never happened. For 4 years, no one asked questions. No one looked deeper. No one saw the cracks in the story that had ruined his life. But the truth, a pause, deliberate, heavy, stretching the silence, the truth never stays buried forever. It started with a whisper. A rumor passed between hushed conversations. A discrepancy in the timeline. A security camera that should have been off but wasn't. A secret so dark, so carefully hidden, that when it began to unravel, it didn't just expose a lie, it set the stage for something far greater. A reckoning years in the making. This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's not just about an innocent man condemned. It's about patience. About revenge. About what happens when the people who think they hold all the power, realize, too late, that the real game has only just begun. Because when the truth finally came out, the woman who had accused him, she wouldn't just lose the case. She wouldn't just lose the trust of those who had once rallied behind her. She would lose everything. This is the story of a lie that destroyed a man's life. And of the revenge that waited, silent, patient, until the moment was just right. It was a life most could only dream of. A world of excess, wealth, and untouchable power. Behind the high iron gates of the sprawling estate, luxury dripped from every corner, imported marble floors, art worth millions hanging from the walls, a fleet of cars lined in pristine formation along the driveway. A fortress of privilege and secrecy. Inside, the man who built it all, a billionaire who rose from nothing, his empire spanning continents. Ruthless in business, respected in circles where money dictated worth. But in his personal life? A mystery. He rarely spoke to the press, rarely showed emotion. To the outside world, he was the embodiment of control, a man who had mastered the art of silence. And then, there was her. His wife. Beautiful, captivating, the perfect socialite. The kind of woman who commanded attention the moment she entered a room. She played the role well, adoring, devoted, poised beside her husband like a diamond centerpiece. But beneath the surface, beneath the carefully curated image, there were whispers. Whispers of secrets. Whispers of a woman who knew how to play the game, how to get what she wanted. And finally, the driver. A man who had spent years in quiet service to the family. Humble beginnings. A devoted father. A husband. A man who had never once broken the trust given to him. He wasn't just an employee, he was part of the foundation that kept the household running. Until one night, when all of it came crashing down. For years, this mansion held secrets. But on one fateful night, one lie would bring it all to ruin. It started with a phone call. A call that shattered the silence of the night, a call that would change lives forever. 911, what's your emergency? The voice on the other end was barely coherent. Hysterical. A woman gasping for breath, words tumbling out in broken sobs. Please, help me, the dispatcher tried to keep her calm. Ma'am, tell me what happened. Are you in danger? The line crackled with static. Then, he attacked me. He hurt me. And then, a name. One that would send shockwaves through the estate, through the city, through the world. The police wasted no time. When they arrived at the mansion, the scene was already in motion. The wife, collapsed in the grand foyer, her silk robe torn, her hands shaking violently. Bruises, stark against her skin. Tears streaking her face as she pointed with a trembling hand. It was him. And that was all it took. The driver, still in his uniform, was found in his small quarters near the back of the property. He was asleep when they barged in. Dragged from his bed. Confused. Disoriented. Demanding to know what was happening. The officers didn't hesitate. They had their suspect. They had their victim. And as they forced him to the ground, as the cold steel of the cuffs snapped around his wrists, the wife's cries echoed through the halls. The evidence. Unquestionable. The bruises. The torn dress. The DNA on her clothes. The narrative took shape within minutes. A loyal driver, a trusted employee, turned predator. And the world? The world responded with outrage. Social media erupted. News anchors spoke with hushed, horrified voices. How could this happen? How could a man who was meant to serve, to protect, betray the very family who had given him everything? The trial hadn't even begun, but the verdict had already been decided. The courtroom was filled to capacity. Reporters lined the aisles, their cameras aimed like weapons, ready to capture every moment of the spectacle. The prosecution wasted no time. They laid out the case with ruthless efficiency. The bruises. The 911 call. The torn clothing. The traces of his DNA found on her body. The jury listened in silence as the wife took the stand. She spoke through trembling lips, her voice raw with emotion. She described, in excruciating detail, the moment she was attacked. How she had struggled, how she had begged him to stop. How he had ignored her cries. The prosecutor turned to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not just a case of violence. This is a case of betrayal. This man, trusted, respected, used that trust to commit the ultimate crime. The driver's defense? Weak. His lawyer argued that the evidence didn't add up. That something was missing. That the DNA, the timeline, the entire story had inconsistencies. But no one listened. The public had already decided. The jury, too. It took them only 3 hours to reach a verdict. And when they returned, the words fell like a hammer. Guilty. The sentence? 15 years. As the judge read it aloud, the driver didn't move. He didn't protest. He simply stared ahead, numb, as the weight of the moment pressed down on him. In the front row, the billionaire husband sat motionless. His expression unreadable. His wife beside him, fingers clenched into the fabric of her dress, eyes filled with relief, with gratitude, with something else. And just like that, it was over. Justice, swift and brutal. The world moved on. The headlines shifted to new stories. The outrage faded, replaced by new scandals, new tragedies. And in a cold, gray prison cell, an innocent man sat in silence, condemned for a crime he didn't commit. But behind closed doors, a different story was waiting to be told. Because what happened next changed everything. In the days after the trial, the house felt different. The silence stretched longer. The halls, once filled with the hum of a well-kept life, now carried an emptiness he couldn't quite explain. The world had moved on. His wife, finally able to rest, wore the tragedy like a badge of survival. She cried in front of cameras, thanked the justice system, spoke about healing, about moving forward. She played the role beautifully, a victim finding her strength again. And for a while, he believed her. How could he not? The evidence had been overwhelming. The case airtight. His driver, a man he had trusted for years, had been found guilty. The courts had spoken. Justice had been served. But something didn't sit right. It started as a whisper in his mind, an irritation he couldn't shake. The way she spoke about that night, it was rehearsed. Too perfect. Too well-structured. He told himself he was imagining it, that trauma made people repeat things like a script, that it didn't mean anything. But then, there was the matter of the bruises. He had seen them that night, dark and ugly against her skin. But when he thought back to the details, they weren't where they should have been. The places she claimed to have been held down, the injuries didn't match. And the more he thought about it, the more the images in his mind didn't align. Then came the whispers. Staff, speaking in hushed tones. Conversations that stopped when he entered a room. He wasn't supposed to hear them. But he did. And what he heard made his blood turn cold. She was out late that night, but not with him. She told us she was going to the spa, but she never came back until morning. The cameras, they weren't working that night. But someone turned them off. The doubt festered. He didn't want to believe it. If he questioned it, if he dared to go down that road, it would mean everything had been a lie. But the feeling wouldn't go away. And so, one evening, when his wife was out for a charity gala, he made a call. A quiet call. To a man he had used before. A man who knew how to find the truth, even when people went to great lengths to hide it. A private investigator. Ruthless. Unrelenting. And bound to secrecy. I want you to look into something, he said. And just like that, the real investigation began. The first few days brought nothing. A dead end. On paper, everything aligned. The evidence. The timeline. The case was solid. Untouchable. But then, the cracks began to show. It started with the hotel records. The wife had claimed to be home the entire evening before the attack, but the investigator found something different. A reservation. A penthouse suite under an alias. Paid in cash. And she wasn't alone. Surveillance footage, grainy but unmistakable, showed her stepping out of a luxury car, laughing. Drunk. Arms draped around another man. Someone who wasn't her husband. Someone who wasn't the driver. And then, the money trail. A quiet, discreet transaction. Large sums wired to a single account. A witness. A maid who had been working the night of the attack. Someone who had sworn, under oath, that she had seen the driver force his way into the wife's bedroom. A witness whose testimony had been a key piece of evidence in court. Except now, there was proof. Proof that she had been paid to say those words. And that was just the beginning. The bruises? Fake. Self-inflicted. The DNA? Planted. Stolen from a used water bottle and transferred onto her dress. The security footage that should have captured the attack. Deleted. Intentionally. By someone with access to the estate's security system. One by one, the lies unraveled. Until there was nothing left but the truth. And the final, devastating blow. Her lover. The man she had been with that night. The man who, when confronted by the investigator, folded under pressure. Who admitted everything. It was her idea. The whole thing. She said she needed to get rid of the driver, and this was the way to do it. She said she wanted to teach her husband a lesson. And just like that, the case wasn't just a lie. It was an orchestrated attack. A scheme. Calculated. Cold. Designed to destroy an innocent man. And it had worked. For 4 years, it had worked. But now, the truth was in his hands. And the billionaire? He wasn't going to the police. No. He had other plans. For 4 years, his wife had played her game. And for 4 years, he had believed her. But now, the game belonged to him. He didn't confront her. Not at first. He played his role. The devoted husband. The grieving, protective partner. He watched as she continued to bask in the sympathy, in the power she had gained from her lies. And behind the scenes, he built his case. Every piece of evidence. Every transaction. Every detail that could prove, beyond a shadow of a doubt, what she had done. He gathered it all, carefully, methodically. And then, he made his move. He reached out to the media. The same media that had crucified his driver without question. The same outlets that had built his wife into a tragic figure. He fed them the truth, piece by piece, knowing that once the first crack appeared, the whole thing would collapse. And then, he set the trap. A phone call. A carefully orchestrated conversation. A moment of arrogance on her part, a moment where she let her mask slip, just for a second. You really think they'll believe you now? She laughed. After everything? After all these years? It doesn't matter. He's nothing. He was always nothing. She didn't know she was being recorded. She didn't know her words would be the final nail in her own coffin. For 4 years, he planned his every move. He wasn't just going to clear his driver's name. He was going to make sure she lost everything. For 4 years, she lived in the glow of her own deception. She walked red carpets, gave tearful interviews, played the role of a survivor in a world that embraced her with open arms. She was untouchable. Respected. A symbol of strength and resilience. She thought she had won. But she underestimated the man she had betrayed. The man she had stood beside in front of cameras, the one who had watched in silence as she spun her web of lies. She thought his silence was compliance. She thought his loyalty was blind. She was wrong. It started small. A leak. A whisper. A thread that, when pulled, unraveled everything. An anonymous tip to a well-known journalist. A USB drive dropped at their office, filled with files. Bank statements. Surveillance footage. Secret transactions. Bribes. A confession recorded in crisp, undeniable clarity. At first, the networks hesitated. She was a public figure, after all. A woman whose story had captured the hearts of millions. To question her now, it would mean admitting they had been wrong. That they had been complicit in a lie. But then, the recording surfaced. Her voice, clear, unmistakable, laced with arrogance. "You really think they'll believe you now?" She had laughed. "He's nothing. He was always nothing." The media turned overnight. The same outlets that had championed her story, that had painted the driver as a monster, were now ripping her apart. Headlines screamed betrayal. Exposed, the lie that ruined a man. Shocking new evidence turns infamous case upside down. Social media exploded. The same people who had once demanded justice for her were now demanding justice for the man she had destroyed. And then, the courts took notice. The case was reopened. New forensic experts analyzed the so-called evidence. The truth was undeniable. The DNA had been planted. The bruises faked. The witness bribed. Everything she had claimed, every tear, every trembling statement, had been a carefully crafted performance. The driver, once branded a predator, was exonerated. His conviction overturned. His record wiped clean. A free man once more. But freedom does not erase 4 years stolen. And while the world celebrated the truth, another story was unfolding. She thought she had played the perfect game. But now, the whole world saw the truth. The arrest came quietly. No cameras. No press. Just a knock at the door of the same grand estate where the lie had begun. She opened it, expecting another day of luxury. Instead, she was met with cold, expressionless faces. Officers in uniform. A warrant held up for her to see. "Ma'am, we have a court order for your arrest. You are being charged with perjury, conspiracy, and evidence tampering." She laughed at first. Dismissed it as a mistake. But the cuffs were real. The flash of panic in her eyes was real. The tightening in her throat, the sinking in her chest, the way her hands trembled as they took her away, all of it was real. For the first time in 4 years, she was the one in chains. She sat in court, the same way her driver once had, listening as the prosecution dismantled her life piece by piece. Every lie. Every deception. Every step she had taken to destroy an innocent man. Her lover, the man she had schemed with, testified against her. The witness she had bribed took the stand and confessed. The bank transactions were undeniable. Her husband. He never looked at her once. She begged. Pleaded. Sobbed. She blamed the media, the pressure, the expectations placed on her. She claimed she had been manipulated, that she had been scared. But this time, no one believed her. And when the judge handed down the sentence, when he declared her guilty and condemned her to 20 years behind bars, there were no cameras. No sympathetic voices. No one waiting outside to defend her name. She had spent 4 years shaping a false reality. But in the end, the only thing she had built, was her own prison. And the man she had betrayed? The one who had silently watched as she orchestrated his downfall? He was gone. Divorced. Moved on. His empire now fully in his control, with nothing left of her name but disgrace. She had wanted power. She had wanted control. But now, All she had were the four cold walls of a prison cell. She cried in court, but this time, no one believed her. The driver walked out of prison a free man. But freedom did not mean justice. The years taken from him could never be returned. The time lost with his family. The moments stolen from his children. The reputation that had been shattered beyond repair. They offered him compensation. Money. Apologies from those who had condemned him without question. He refused. "I don't want money," he said. "I just want my life back." And so, he disappeared. Left the city. Started over. A quiet life, away from the noise, away from the headlines. But she had no such escape. In prison, she became just another inmate. Another story whispered about in hushed voices. The woman who had everything and lost it all. The woman who thought she was untouchable. She watched the world move on without her. The husband she had once manipulated, now thriving. His empire stronger than ever. His face on magazine covers, flanked by new success, new beginnings. And her? Forgotten. A relic of a scandal no one wanted to remember. She destroyed a man's life with one lie, and in the end, lost her own. But tell me, was this justice? Or just another kind of revenge? The lie was perfect. The execution? Flawless. For 4 years, she lived in the comfort of a fabricated reality, convinced she had erased the past, that her story had become the truth. But in the end, the truth doesn't disappear. It waits. Patiently. And when it finally comes to light, it doesn't just expose lies, it destroys everything built on them. A man, stripped of his dignity, his freedom, left to rot for a crime he never committed. A husband, betrayed, forced to watch as his life became a stage for deceit. And a woman, so consumed by power, so convinced of her own invincibility, that she never saw the reckoning creeping toward her. She thought she had won. She thought she had control. But when the game finally ended, she was the only one left with nothing. But now, I ask you, was justice truly served? The husband uncovered the truth. He exposed the lies. He restored the name of a man who had lost everything. But he didn't stop there. He didn't let the law handle it. He didn't give her the chance to defend herself the way her victim never could. Instead, he chose vengeance. He orchestrated her downfall as carefully as she had designed her deception. He watched, silently, as she unraveled, as she was dragged away in chains, as the world turned against her. And in the end, she lost everything. But tell me, did he go too far? Was this justice? Or just another kind of revenge? I want to hear your thoughts. Was her punishment deserved? Or did the husband cross the line? Leave your comments below, let's talk about it. And if this story shocked you, if you couldn't look away, make sure to hit that like button. The more people who engage, the more these stories reach those who need to hear them. And if you love unraveling the darkest corners of human nature, if you crave stories that challenge what you think you know, then make sure to subscribe. Because there are more stories waiting. Stories that will make you question everything. After all, the truth is never as simple as it seems.